Oh, the recording just came. Okay. But I'm not going back to everything we describe as the base for what I will talk about in the next 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so. But so we have the Bible that we have at home. It has the 24 books. And at one point, those 24 books had to be written, physically written. The tradition passed, and it was written maybe in a different format. Uh, some biblical scholars even say that the actual formal writings of the books of the Torah started at the completion of the first temple. So they say when King Solomon finished building the first temple, the sages sat down and started to write the books of the Torah from history that was getting further and further away from them. So at that time, we're talking about the year 960 before the Common Era, 3,000 years ago. The Bible started at creation, and the stories of Moses started about 400 years before. Nevertheless, we have now, and we had it for a long time, almost 2,000 years, a canonized version. And that's the version that we know. We call it the Mesorah in Hebrew. That's how this version of the Bible is referred to. Mesorah from the word of Masoret, tradition. I'm going to take a sidestep here just to tell you that the oldest version of the Bible that we know is called the Sasson Codex, Codex, Codex. It's a handwritten Bible from about 1,000 years ago. Some scholars said that it was written on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias, and others say that it was written in Jerusalem. In May of 2023, less than a year and a half ago, it went on for an auction at Sotheby in England. And the person that owned it at the time was David Salomon Sasson, and that's why it's called the Sasson Codex. And a museum from Tel Aviv called the Ono Museum sent somebody named Alfred Moses to participate in the auction. And he, in fact, bought it for $38.1 million. And the Sasson Codex, the oldest version of the Bible as we know it today, handwritten, is in Tel Aviv in a museum called the Ono Museum. Just so you know, since October 7 of last year, when the war in Gaza started, it was removed from display and it was sent to a storage in a safe place. Nobody wanted to take a chance that one of the rockets, one of the drones, one of the bombs will pass through all the defense system Israel has and will land on a museum and destroy such a treasure. The oldest copy of the Mesorah, the Bible, in existence is in Tel Aviv. It's not likely it will ever leave Israel. So it's very likely that it's always going to be in Israel. It's going to be in the museum, and maybe at one point we'll move to the Israel Museum on loan, etc. But next time you're in Tel Aviv, if you want to, God willing, the war will be over soon. You can go to the Ono Museum, O-N-O, Ono Museum, and see it. It's literally available for you to see all of it. I'm sure that it's available online as well. So back to our track. 2,200 years ago, the sages, the rabbis, the leaders decide, okay, it's time to put together the Bible, put together the different books of the Bible into a canonized version. If you want to know what was chosen, just open the Bible you have at home. But in addition to all of those books that you will find in the Bible that you have at home, there were about 35 or 40 additional books that did not make it in. So literally, there are many other books that didn't make it in. When I sent an email to Rabbi Tilchin with what I think is kind of a summary of what I'm about to teach today, I refer to them as the external books. To be honest with you, I had a problem with the reference to apocryphal books, because to me, apocryphal denotes or mean or has lived the connotation or lived the impression that they're doubtful or false. And as you're going to see during my presentation, they're not so false. Some of that is not so false, and some of it is not so doubtful. Most people didn't even know that there is such thing called external books, what I call external books. It's when biblical scholar published the list of the scrolls, the books that were found at the Qumran caves, Dead Sea Scrolls. All of a sudden, there were names of books that are not included in our Bible. And that's how some people in the 50s became aware that, whoa, there are additional books that didn't make it into the Bible. Additional books were written and they're not included in our Rabbi. But let's start from the beginning, the process of writing it. Just so you know, in Hebrew, you may hear the word the Asufa, the collection, or Sifrei Asufa, the books of the collection, or what I call the external books, the books that are external to our Bible. And I'll give you some example about some of them. So the biblical scholar said it's clear that the Mesorah, the Bible as we know it, was written inside the walls of the temple. What was written outside the walls of the temple didn't make it into the Bible as we know it. So everything had to be written inside. And as I mentioned, they believed that some of them were written before, during King Solomon's era, when the first temple was built. But that's really kind of not applicable to our conversation, because once that temple was burnt, it's very likely that all of those copies were burnt with the temple. They were all stored in the temple. And no one canonized it at that point. And it's a good thing, because a lot of events happened after King Solomon's era. Our Bible would have ended with maybe the second book of Kings. And we would have missed a lot more that happened later, right? Anywhere from the destruction of the first temple, 586 before the Common Era, the book of Ruth, etc., right? So it's not important for our conversation. I'll leave it alone. I'm going to go and start with just what we know as the Bible and where the origin of those books came into being in terms of writing. The year 586 before the Common Era, Nebuchadnezzar, the leader of the Babylonian Empire, we know, invade Jerusalem, actually a year before, destroy Jerusalem, destroy the temple, exile the people to different parts of the world. We always refer to it to Babylon, because that's where most of the people went. But some were exiled to Egypt, like Jeremiah, the prophet. Many Cohens were exiled to Jerba, an island off the coast of Tunisia, kind of at the bay between Sicily and Tunisia. So they were exiled to many parts, Syria, Greece, etc. But as great as Nebuchadnezzar was, the person that followed him was not. He was not a good warrior, and he was not a good leader. And the Persian Empire saw it as an opportunity to conquer the Babylonian Empire and its vast land. Cyrus the Great, the leader of the Persian Empire, did that, and he defeated the Babylonian Empire, took over all of the land. And one of the early things that he did, and this is only about 30 years or so after the destruction of the temple, is allowing the Jews, and by the way, not only the Jews, many other people that were conquered by the Babylonian and were in exile as well, mostly their leaders. He allowed the Jews to return back to the land and to rebuild the temple. And you think, what a wonderful guy. He allowed the Jews to rebuild the temple, the center of the religious Judaism. But it's not just the center of spirituality. The temple was also the center of government. It was also the center of tax collection. So Cyrus the Great, being the wise man that it was, figured, yeah, they can build their spiritual center, but they also will have a place where I can collect taxes and I can govern, etc. Nevertheless, the Jews came back. It took some time, and roughly around the year 515 before the Common Era, the second temple is standing. And now the rabbis said, okay, the second temple is standing, and the sages and the leaders, not just rabbi. Rabbi is a relatively newer term in Judaism. They said, okay, it's time for us to sit down and start writing the books of the Bible, the books that happened, and now the history is further away from them. This is 515 before the Common Era. The Exodus from Egypt happened already 800 years before, and they're trying to catch up. As time goes by, history runs away from them, and they need to catch up. So the temple, the second temple is standing, and they say, okay, we need to write it. The key was always that the books of the Bible have to be written inside the walls of the temple. And the reason for it is because it's a huge task. It includes the sages that memorized the things. It included rabbis to guide. It included editors, executive editors. They didn't just sit down and write. They had to make sure that every detail, every name, every location is accurate and makes sense. They looked at it as the Jewish nation writing its history, as opposed to individual books that have nothing to do with each other. The stories had to be put together in the exact order that made sense. You couldn't write the books of Kings and then right after it write the books of Joshua. It didn't make sense. Joshua happened before. This was a big project with a lot of people. They're overseeing and editing, executive editors. They're making sure that every word is correct. But it wasn't fast. It took a long time. And even once those books were written, there was some addition to them to correct this or correct that or put it in a certain format, in a certain order. Eventually, the format it kind of shaped is called the Jerusalem format. And it's very, very close to what we have today on the shelf in our home. But at the same time that all of those scribes and sages and rabbis and leaders and Cohens, etc., are sitting inside the temple, writing the books of the Bible, there's a whole bunch of writers outside the temple writing the same books, mind you, slightly differently probably, and writing additional books that most of us don't even know about. And there's a large collection of all those books that were written outside the temple by scribes and sages, etc., that are not exactly the same as what's inside the Bible. And certainly some of them didn't even make it into the Bible. Remember, those inside the temple are writing from the perspective of a Jewish nation. Those outside the temple are not organized in any group, are not organized in any format. They don't follow any guideline like, oh, we're writing it from the perspective of the Jewish nation. They don't talk about it and work at it as one. They're individual writers, sages that remember the stories and they write them down. Or they're writing totally different books privately. It's an unofficial version of the same books that we have in the Bible, plus additional books. So I mentioned that there were about 35 to 40, most scholars agree, additional books, external books. There were many others that literally were parallel to the book. So just like there was Book of Kings written inside the walls of the temple, there was a Book of Kings first and second, written outside, slightly different. And then the year 70 happened. The year 70 is when the second temple was destroyed. And not long after that, the year 135 of the Common Era, the Bar Kokhba revolt happened. During those two major events in Jewish history, a lot of those external books were destroyed. So it's very likely that there were more than 35 or 40. There were many more, but they were destroyed. Some of them survived because they were hidden. For example, the caves of Qumran. The caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea, and what we often refer to as the Dead Sea Scroll, has in it books that now you can read. Literally, you can buy the book and read, that are not included in the Bible. What those books describe, to some extent, is different Judaism. The books of the Bible tell us nothing about the external books, tell us nothing about a different kind of Judaism that existed. The books that I call the external books tell us more. They tell us more about what happened during biblical time, and they tell us more about a second type of Judaism that existed. And this second type of Judaism was slightly different than Judaism, rejected, literally rejected what they call temple Judaism as we know it today. And they did not agree with the Judaism as we know it today. But a lot of what they write is part of the Judaism we know it today. And those two types of Judaism are running parallel to each other. One is centered at its core in Jerusalem, and the other one is centered in other places, led by rabbis and their students in cities like Lod, Yavne, Bnei Brak, all of which exist to this day. I went to elementary school and high school in the city of Lod. 2,000 years ago, rabbis and their followers, their students, describe a different type of Judaism that existed in Lod and in Bnei Brak, just outside Tel Aviv, and in Tzipori, which is in part of what some people call the West Bank, other Judea and Samaria. Literally different kinds of Judaism at the same time, going parallel to each other. And remember, our Bible doesn't tell us anything about it. The external books, tell us about it. So on one hand, we have the books of the Bible that tell us the version of what happened throughout the history of the Bible. And on the other hand, you have rabbis and their students in different cities telling us about a different kind of Judaism. That spelled trouble. And Rabbi Akiva, the same one we know from the Talmud and many other writings, came to the rescue. Because now the temple, second temple, is destroyed. The Bar Kokhba revolt is about to happen. 5 years before or so, the year 130 of the Common Era, the Bar Kokhba revolt happened the year 135. Rabbi Akiva sees trouble with these two paths, two different kinds of Judaism, and he canonized the Bible that was written inside the walls of the temple. And this one action that he took, canonizing the Bible, literally deciding this is the final version, and the final version is identical to the Jerusalem version with very minor changes. With this one act, it literally connected the Jews all over the known world at the time, whether they lived in Greece or in Syria or in Babylon or in Egypt or in the land of Israel, into one book. And we call it the Bible today. Some of those books that are external to the Bible were translated to other languages. This is how, for example, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible, which is the foundation of what many of the Christian versions of the Bibles are based on. Simply, Christian scholar knew Greek more than they knew Hebrew. So they took the Greek translation and they adopted it into the Christian Bible. There are letter version, we know, like James, King James, etc. But for the sake of this conversation, they took the books of the Septuagint and made a Christian Bible out of it with addition, right? That's how the book of Maccabees is in the Christian Bible. Anybody knows the book of Maccabees in our Bible? We don't. It was translated to Greek, it was adopted into Christianity, but it's not in ours. And one thing that Rabbi Akiva did when he canonized the Bible as we know it, at the same time that he said, this is the Bible of the Jews, all over the world, he banned the readings, the possession of the other books, the external books. But he said something when he banned that is very peculiar. He said, you are not allowed to read the books, the external books that I refer to, the books that are not part of the Bible, or you will have no place in the world to come. It's a scary thought, right? You have no place in the world to come if you read the books outside. There's one problem with this statement. The world to come is not part of the Bible. It's part of the external books. And I'll give you a number of examples that prove it. Clearly, Rabbi Akiva, the rabbi that canonized the Bible as we know it, also read the external books. Because if he didn't read the external books and he didn't know the content of the external books, he wouldn't know about the world to come. There's nothing in our Bible about the world to come. Do you know where it comes from? The book of Hanoch. The book of Hanoch is one of the oldest external books. It's not part of the Bible. And I'll talk about it for a moment or two. In chapter 5 of the book of Genesis, remember after the whole story of creation, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, etc., the Bible gives us descriptions of the generations that follow, right? So-and-so lived so long, he died, then his son lived so long, then he died, and his son lived so long and he's died. And I'm not even going to get into whether it's true or not that he lived 300 or 600, or it's not important for the conversation. The Bible needed to give us some chronological order between Adam and Eve and Noah and Abraham, etc., right? But in this writing, in chapter 5, we learn about Hanoch, one of the men listed in that list. And we know that Hanoch lived 365 years. I remember because it's an easy number to remember. But the Bible doesn't say that he died. Everybody in that list, it says he lived so long, he died, and his son lived so long, he died. For Hanoch, the Bible said that God took him. Took him where? We don't know. The Bible didn't think it's important to elaborate on and just moved on to the next person in line. So we have a person that lived 365 years, didn't die, that took him. Took him where? We don't know. So the Bible gives us nothing about Hanoch because the Bible didn't think it's important. The Bible we know, right? Didn't think that it's important. But it was important to the writers that wrote the book of Hanoch, an external book. And I'll tell you a little bit about this external book. The book of Hanoch, phenomenal, and it's available in print even today. He is described as a big hero. They tell us that one day he went to sleep, angels came and took him up to the sky and walked him through the different spheres of the sky. And they walked him through all the seven spheres. And on the seventh sphere, he met God face to face. They tell us that he spoke with God. The book of Hanoch even gives us the description of God as Hanoch said it. Where do we have something of this nature in our Bible? They tell us also in the book of Hanoch that when Hanoch arrived at the third sphere, he saw heaven and hell. What? In our Bible, heaven is on earth. Remember? Adam and Eve, the book of tree, the book of knowledge, right? It's on earth. It's the first time that it's mentioned that heaven is up above in the sky. Did the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Gemara talked about heavens up high? Yes, they did. Did it come from the Bible? No, it did not. It came from the external books. So clearly, the rabbis at the time knew about the external book and adopted some of the things written in the external books and made it part of our tradition. That's how we believe you go up to the heaven. Where in the Bible does it say that when you die, you continue existing somewhere else? It doesn't. It comes from the book of Hanoch, an external book. Because Hanoch is describing that when he was on the third sphere, he saw the righteous people in heaven. And he is also talking about how when the resurrection of the dead will happen, and I'll come back to this in a moment, they will come back to life, they will come back to earth, and they would live about 1,000 additional years. On the other side of this heaven, Hanoch is describing hell. Where in the Bible do we have the word hell? We know that the earth will open and people will get sucked into the bottom of the earth. We know in the Bible, somebody that kind of rebelled against Moses went down. But Hanoch is describing a place called hell on the same sphere as heaven, just on the other side of it, where all the sinners are going. And he's describing in the book of Hanoch the punishments that they're getting for their sins that they committed on earth. And he's telling how those people will not be part of the resurrections of the dead. Where does it say that in the Bible, our Bible? It doesn't. It all comes from rabbinic tradition, the Mishnah, the Gemara, Talmud, right? You know, at the same time that all of those books were written, the Mishnah started to form. The Mishnah is the first major rabbinic literature that started about the year 200 before the Common Era and lasted for about 400 years until about the year 202, when Rabbi Judah the Prince, Yehuda Anasi, codified all of these discussions, debate, etc., for the previous 4 years into what we know as the Mishnah. And as soon as he finished the Mishnah, the rabbis were not going to just sit down and say, great, we finished. They started a new process. They took about 300 years for the Gemara, and eventually we ended up with the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the addition, etc., the interpretation, right? And all of those things are coming from external books. A lot of the stories, a lot of the examples, a lot of the decisions that we see in the Mishnah, that kind of ran parallel to what was going on with the external book. During the time the Mishnah was debated, Rabbi Akiva canonized the Bible. The Bible was not canonized until about 52 years after Rabbi Akiva canonized the Bible. And that's when Judah the Prince wrote or put together and codified the Mishnah. There's nothing in the Bible, by the way, about resurrection of dead. Now, I know You're going to say, hey, Ezekiel is describing the bones, the dry bones that came back to life. And that's one interpretation. But did you know that most biblical scholars don't look at it as an actual resurrection of death? They look at it as a metaphor. They're saying the people of Israel were in exile. There was a metaphor for dry bones, dead. And they returned back from exile that Yechezkel, Ezekiel described, is the resurrection of the dead, is the resurrection of the Jewish people back to their homeland, back to rebuilding the temple, etc. So whether you believe that the resurrection of the dead describe actual resurrection, or whether you believe that the resurrection of the dead is actually metaphor for the Jewish people coming out of exile back to the land of Israel and rebuilding the temple, one way or the other, we don't have a tradition or discussion in great deal in the Bible about resurrection of dead, about people living on earth, and when they die, they continue to live somewhere else, heaven or hell. And certainly it's not in the sky. That's not from our Bible. Here's another example from the book of Hanoch. And I need you to understand it's very difficult for me as a rabbi to talk about this, because in my profession, you don't contradict the Bible or the words of God, etc. But I'm just doing a teaching, and I'm holding back a lot. I'm really holding back a lot. The Bible described God as the only power in the world, major power in the world, and described the angels as those beings with secondary power, right? Like the power to heal, Raphael, or the power to hurt, etc., right? The power to do things. The book of Hanoch described two major powers in the world. The book of Hanoch says the second major power in the world is Satan. Doesn't call him Satan, call it Sar Amastema, the minister of Mastema. But that's what he's referring to in the book of Hanoch. And he says that even Sar Amastema, that we call Satan, also has angel. They call him ghost, Shedim in Hebrew. And they also go around to do his work. The book of Hanoch says that God spoke only to Moses face to face, and our Bible says that God spoke to Moses face to face. All the other communication were a vision, dream, etc. But the book of Hanoch says that Satan's and his messengers are also talking to people and also communicating. They're saying that Satan also lives up in the sky. And it even goes, that's sacrilege in my eyes, but they're saying that Satan is stronger than God. They're saying God has power only over the Jewish people, and Satan has power over all of humanity. And he's quite often interfering in the process of God's work on earth. There are rabbinic stories in Mishnah, Gemara, etc., that include Satan left and right. And Satan is not a character really of any value in the Bible. That all comes from the external books. Let me give you another book called Sefer Ayovlim, the Book of Jubilees. It's called the Book of Jubilees because everything is on cycle of 7 years and cycle of 50 years. And for example, this book, which was probably written parallel to the books that were written inside the wall of the temple, retell the story of creation, mostly as we know it. It tells us the story of the patriarch and the matriarch, mostly as we know it. But it adds a lot of other characters that we don't know. They're not included in our Bible. It tells us that the Bible is telling us that Abraham was the first Jew, right? God picked him. But the Bible doesn't tell us why. Why was he so special? What did he do the first 75 years of his life before God picked him? What about Noah? Why was Noah so righteous? What did the other people do that was so awful that they had to be exterminated? The Bible doesn't tell us. The book of Ayovlim, the book of Jubilee, tells us. It gives us a lot of information that the Bible is not giving us. What I'm trying to tell you is that the external books give a great deal of information. You can say that it's doubtful, you can say it's false, it's okay. That the Bible doesn't give us. Here's another story from another book. It's called the Book of Tuvia, not Fiddler on the Roof, Tuvia. That's what the external book is called, the Book of Tuvia. And it's telling an amazing story. It's telling a story about someone that lived in Babylon called Abba Tuvi, Father Tuvi, a rich man, well-to-do man, a pious man. He did a lot of good things for Jewish causes and for Jewish people in Babylon. And one day, he's sitting at the Seder. The book of Tuvia is telling us the story. He's sitting at the Seder when somebody comes in and said, there's a Jewish man dead in the market. So Abba Tuvi gets up from the Seder, Passover Seder, goes to the market, picks up the dead person, buries him, and comes back. The Bible says when you come in contact with a dead body, you are not pure anymore, and you cannot participate in the Paschal Lamb, which means you cannot participate in the Seder. By the way, other books, external books, says that's not correct. But Abba Tuvi knows, based upon the teaching of the Bible, that when you come in contact with a dead body, you're not pure, you cannot participate in the Paschal Lamb, therefore the Seder. So he sits by the walls of his house. That's what the book of Tuvia describes. He sits just outside the walls of his house. Later on, he falls asleep. He doesn't want to come in because he knows he's not pure. He falls asleep and two doves, pardon my language, poop on his eyes. But those are not regular doves. They're doves that Satan sent. They call them, in this particular case, the ghost is called Ashmedai. Again, another version of one of the Shedim, one of the ghosts that work under Satan. They poop on his eyes. Because of that, he goes blind. So this well-to-do rich man that was doing good thing is going blind, and he's starting to lose his fortune. And suddenly he's a poor man. Then one day the story continues. He remembers that he left a small fortune with a relative far away, kind of for safekeeping, for a rainy day. So he called his son, young teenage son named Tuvia, and he said, I need you to go to relative Joe Schmo and bring that fortune back so we can live. We're on our last piece of bread. Tuvia said, I don't know the way to that place. I'm young. I won't be able to protect myself. Back then, you couldn't just get on the freeway and drive. It was quite a trip. So he's saying, I can't do it. And suddenly, a stranger appeared in the book, and he tells Tuvia and his father, Abba Tuvi, I know the way to that town. I'll take you over there, protect you, and bring you back. And the story goes that those two, Tuvia, the teenage son, and this stranger, go on this trip. And when they are on the edge of the Euphrates River, you remember they were in Babylon, Iraq today mostly. They're on the edge of the Euphrates. Tuvia casts a line. It catches a big fish, but the fish is so strong that it pulls him into the water. The stranger goes into the water, saves Tuvia, and lands the fish. And after Tuvia thanks him, the stranger said, we will eat this fish, but first we have to move the gallbladder, the liver, and the heart, and then we'll eat the rest. We will use those three organs later on. As they continue the trip, this stranger is telling Tuvia about a young woman called Sarah that live in the house where they're going to, where that relative lives, that was married 7 times. And each time on their wedding night, when they enter the marital chamber, the husband died each time. And so she's very sad and she's very devastated. And he keeps telling her a story about this young lady named Sarah, and Tuvia fall in love with her without even seeing her even. So finally, when they arrive at the house of the relative, instead of Tuvia getting into, let me have the fortune, we need to go, blah, 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 he's busy with this falling in love with Sarah. And so he falls in love with her and he decides to marry her. The stranger is telling Tuvia, when you're married, when you enter the marital chamber, take the liver and the heart and put it on the fire. You know, the lamp in the room, no electricity back then. The smell that will come will scare Ashmedai, will scare the angel of Satan or the ghost of Satan. So they get married. They go into the marital chamber. He takes the heart and the liver, he puts it on the fire. And at the same time that they're in bliss on marital night, on marriage night, the servants are digging a grave outside because they expect him, like everybody else, to die right away. Well, he didn't die. The book actually tells us that the ghost Ashmedai was so repulsed by the smell and so scared that he ran all the way to Egypt. It tells us to Egypt. So Tuvia and his wife Sarah, happy, Tuvia collect the fortune that his father left there and travel with the stranger back to Babylon and give it to his father. The stranger says, take the gallbladder and rub it on your father's eyes. And Tuvia dies, and Abba Tuvi suddenly is not blind. Not being blind and having a small fortune, Abba Tuvi starts to get rich again, well-to-do again, and it's kind of happy ending. The prince on a white horse, etc. It's at the end of the story that the stranger says, I am actually the angel Raphael, the angel of healing. And I was sent down here to heal your father, to protect you, and to protect Sarah from Ashmedai, from the ghost of Satan. We don't know the whole story, what's going on, who is the stranger, until we get to the end. So I kind of gave you a summary, and this is a book that was written 2,400 years ago, at the same time that they were writing books inside the walls, parallel, but it never made it. It never made it into the Bible because that story was never written inside the walls of the temple. So it's a little tough. I mentioned earlier, it's tough for me. It's tough to me to talk about it, except for I look at it as a teaching, and that's what we're doing. It's tough for me to describe events that are written supposedly as part of another kind of Judaism. And it's hard for me to describe events that I have literally the view that they're sacrilege. I'll give you one example for the simple reason that I kind of estimated in my head that you will ask me the question. So I'm going to beat you to it. It's hard for me to talk about it. When I mentioned Hanoch going through the 7 spheres in the sky, all the way to the 7th, where he met God, spoke to God face to face, and described God. I figured somebody will ask me, how did he describe God? Picture Santa Claus. Hanoch described God, kind of similar to the image that we have today of Santa Claus, which is probably not a coincidence that Christianity, mind you, in the modern era, adopted a certain look to the Santa Claus, or as my mom calls him, Papa Noel, because my mom was educated in the French schools of Casablanca, Morocco, and she always referred to it as Papa Noel. I've heard Santa Claus in my 20s, I think, for the first time. It described God that looks like him, and it's probably why Christian scholars kind of, when they modernize Christianity with the Christmas part of Christianity, with the Christmas tree and etc., they made him look a certain way. All three books that I mentioned, the Book of Jubilee, the Book of Hanoch, and the Book of Tuvia, are still in print. If you go when we're down to Amazon, you can buy it and you can read it. And you can see that I, on purpose, left a great deal of information because I have problem. Literally, I have problem talking about it because it just kind of contradicts some of the things that I feel. And I think I spoke for the last 52 minutes. I wanted to leave some time for question before we wrap it up. Thank you for listening. If you have a question, please unmute, ask. I'm happy to answer. Okay. Rabbi Tilchin, do you need to take it over? Oh, sorry, Linda, unmute. I don't see everybody because I only see one screen, and I'm sure maybe there was more than one. I only can see 9, and I'm sure there are more. Yeah, Linda.
Not a question, just a comment, but thank you. That was an incredible story. I really appreciated hearing it. It was wonderful. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Thank you, Linda.
I'll just add, Mike, it was really again a masterful presentation of sort of biblical codification and sort of the many different tracks of our literature. I'm curious, if you were to recommend, if people wanted to read more, where would you send them?
I think the easiest is to go to Amazon. If you want to read the Book of Hanoch, just search on Amazon the Book of Hanoch. The Book of Tuvia, I think Amazon called it Tuvia's book. And the Book of Jubilee is the Book of Jubilee. So you can find, those are the 3 that I focused on. There are literally many more publications. Not all of them are in public domain or available in print, but biblical scholar knew about it. And again, as I mentioned earlier, nobody knew for thousands of years of external books. Outside of biblical scholar, people didn't know that such thing exists. It's only when the list of the scrolls that were found in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scroll, was published, that they noticed it. By the way, some of the scrolls, stories, books that actually are included in our Bible and were found in Qumran, in the Dead Sea Scroll, have some different words, which explain what I said earlier, that there was a collection of people, rabbis, sages, scribes, editors, etc., that sat together to make sure that the version they're writing is the accurate version. But at the same time, there were people outside the temple that were writing the same books, slightly different. They didn't have supervision. They didn't have editor. They didn't have sages. They didn't have rabbis that actually confirm every single word and every single line in it. That's why some of the scrolls, the Dead Sea Scroll, same book, different than the books that are in the Bible. Slightly.
My question to you was more like from the academic perspective, like if people want to learn more about, not the books. I mean, although it would be interesting to read them, and I do agree that much of our theology and a lot of Kabbalistic theology is actually born out of literature that is outside the canon. But sort of, is there in terms of your own reading, your own scholarship, what books about who's writing about the subject that you talked about today that you would recommend to people?
I don't know, but I'll tell you how the process started for me. In the last maybe 12 years, I study the Talmud every day. See it here behind me, all of the books. And I'm on the second round of it. And several years ago, when I read one of the stories in the Talmud from actually the Mishnah, and I was thinking, what is the source of that? And I started to research that. And that's how I came to the external books. And I was thinking, oh, wow, external books, the book of Hanoch. And I bought the book. And through it, I found out other things. And later on, I read the book of Tuvia, etc. The interesting thing is that when you read the external books, they're not all exactly the same. In some books, for example, I spoke about Abba Tuvi feeling that he is impure because he came in contact with a dead body when he took it from the market and buried it, and therefore he didn't want to come into the house because he's not pure to be sit at the Seder, right? The book of Tuvia, for example, says you're not unpure when you come in contact, but the book of Hanoch says you are. Those are external books, and they don't agree on one issue that the Bible is very clear about. You come in contact with that, you are unpure, tameh, therefore you cannot participate in the Paschal Lamb. The Torah even gave us a second Passover 30 days later, right? For those who are unpure. On the way to Jerusalem on the pilgrimage, maybe somebody died, they had to bury him, but they're right outside Jerusalem. So they made it all the way, they traveled for 3 weeks, and now we're going to say, sorry, go back. They gave him a chance to do it 30 days later. I don't know of one particular book or writer that will cover all the external books, but I imagine a simple search on Google will find, or on Amazon will find. I do know because in preparation for this, I verified that indeed the book of Jubilee, the book of Tuvia, or Tuvia's book as it's called, and the book of Hanoch are available. And the book of Hanoch might even be in your library. It's very common.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Well,
the
yeah, no, great class. Thank you so much. And you and I will talk soon about when you'll come back again. And I do hope that we'll see all of you again at some other things. Please, I have a feeling that Hartley Lacker will talk a little bit about that, just in terms of the evolution of Kabbalah and its response to catastrophe. And probably it does refer to, what I'm used to calling the apocryphal and pseudepigraphal literature. But that should be very interesting. So we hope we'll see you all in a week from now. And I just want to wish everybody a Moadim L'Simcha, happy Sukkot. It's a wonderful time, and it was a joy to learn with you today in my sukkah. Mike, thank you so much. Do you want to have
Thank
a
you. Just a quick note, because you mentioned Kabbalah. Kabbalah was seriously influenced by the external books.
Yes, for sure.
Seriously
So
influenced.
anyway, Mike,
Chag
I think
Sameach.
you Chag Sameach, everybody. Thank
Sameach.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.